Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thank you for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jan Vermouth, and joining me as always are my co-hosts Scott Burleson and Jonathan Edwards. Today we have a very exciting guest, Joey Leech. Joey is an energetic coach and advisor to CEOs. He has a lot of experience working with startups, high growth tech unicorns, and Fortune 100 companies. $20 billion in revenue go through the products he has worked on, quite an impressive number, I must say. He has a background in psychology, more specifically in neuroscience. For a bit, he also was a primary school teacher, and for some time, and has written a book that I really want to recommend about design and psychology. I think that is something that we need to bring together more and more. The book is called Psychology for Designers, a Pocket Guide. So please be sure to check that out. Besides that, he's also a great and very entertaining speaker and writer. Today, we'll focus a bit on C-level questions and how Jobs to be Done can help answer them. So stick around if you want to learn why Jobs to be Done is one of the keys to successful C-level strategy. Joe, welcome to the Product Quest podcast.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So let's jump right in, shall we? So in a post, I want to kind of mention that before we go in deeper into these C-level Jobs to be Done kind of things, on your website, which I really like, mrjoe.uk, so mrjoe.uk, you recently claimed that leaders should not want more clarity. Can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Yeah, I can. I think what's interesting about the world that we're in, we all work in the product world, right? And we are very comfortable with experimentation and the uncertainty of the world we're in. And we're pretty great at communicating that uncertainty to the leaders we work with. You know, Agile and Scrum and all those approaches are embracing the uncertainty in the world that we work in. But I don't think that message has necessarily got any higher. And so the folks that I work with in the C-suite, and admittedly that message that clarity is overrated is quite a spiky point of view, but it's the reality of the world that we work in now, where there's no certainty really in business as a whole. And I don't think there ever has been, but what's always been interesting is that leaders have always looked for that. They've always thought, well, we'll do one more piece of research, we'll wait one more month longer, we'll get 5 more employees looking at it, we'll spend 10, there's always a reason to try and get more clarity rather than what I was suggesting, which is in essence what we all know in the product world, which is embracing risk and uncertainty and thriving in challenging places is the place to live. But again, for most folks in the C-suite, that's a scary prospect.
Yeah. So do you think I especially resonates with me is this idea of let's do one more piece of research. I think that is something that a lot of people or folks are in there and just, well, you're uncertain, and probably it's not even, you don't have the clarity, but it's just, you're not willing to take the risk, as it were. And you just slash on another, let's wait a couple of months, let's push the decision back a little bit, but clarity will never come.
Clarity never comes. I mean, clarity, if you're looking at that terminology, really, clarity comes from uncertainty, really. Clarity in direction, rather than clarity of knowing if what you're going to do is right. And you're right, people want certainty. And there's always a reason to, and you have warning signs, which are like, can we just do some validation research? As soon as you hear things like words like validation, you're in a dangerous place because there's no way, you can't really validate anything until it hits the market. We all know that to be true. And maybe you can get 1 or 2% more confidence, but the reality is smart leaders move on 80%. If you've got 80% confidence, 80% clarity, move. Those are great odds. Really, 80% is a great set of odds. You're never going to get to 100%. And people want 100% because, again, there's a fear of if you fail, failure is a bad thing. And again, we know, and we all embraced failure as learnings. But again, as a leader, failure isn't something that's seen as being great. It's not a badge of success, especially as many of the leaders that we all work with are not from the same generation as us. They were schooled in a very different way in terms of business, where you had to have all the answers and you had to be sure that what you were going to be doing was a success because you were viewed, you were measured on your success, and any failure was seen as being a grand failure if you, even a small failure. So there's a lot around the culture of folks who are in the C-suite that's different from the culture that we've all been brought up with in terms of the product world that we've all seen. We've seen that.
Yeah. Is that something you when you engage with those people, is that something that you can actually change or influence in a certain way? Or
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, absolutely. And that was part of the reason I do work with those folks is I got quite frustrated for a long time. So my background was originally in user experience in UX, and I got frustrated that product managers were not listening to UXers and not really understanding truly what they were saying. So I thought, right, I'm going to go to product managers and sort those, listen to what they've got, what's going on
I'll
with
cure
product
them,
managers. Why,
kind of thing.
well, not cue them, but work with them to understand
No,
what makes them
yeah,
tick. What are their challenges? And
yeah,
as soon as you move to that world, you realize it's more than just the customer; it's the business as well. And it's how do you manage a business? How do you manage a
yeah,
hungry development team? How do you manage complex stakeholders? And you realize as soon as you move into product that the world is a level of complexity more than it was in design or in UX or in research. And the same is true of taking that step from there. Is that, again, working with product managers, it was great, and product managers can do amazing things, and everybody can read Marty Kagan's book about being empowered. But if your leaders in your organization are not allowing you to be empowered, that means you can't make the right decisions, and you end up being, told what to build and how to build it. And again, for me, that was really frustrating that leaders are making decisions that I didn't understand. So I was like, well, how can I better understand, follow my curiosity to start working with leaders to understand why are they making the decisions they're making? What is it about their background, their experience that means they make these decisions? And I mean, I just agree with them, but I understand why they were doing that.
yeah. I like how kind of these different ways of where you've been working is led by your not understanding the decision, and then you start working with those people, which helps you then understand.
It's just curiosity. I'm endlessly curious.
Yeah.
It's something that's been, my greatest strength. I mean, it's carried me a long way in my career, definitely, to curiosity.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked a little bit before, and I seen a couple of talks, of course, that you've given, and there, I mean, you mentioned a couple of times jobs to be done, and that kind of helps in your discussions with your work that you do at the moment. And of course, I mean, this is music to our ears here at the Product Quest podcast. We're all kind of really, really enthusiastic about the theory. So can you a little bit enlighten us? How do you use that for C-level? What does that mean?
Yeah, so originally I got into jobs to be done because it was a good nexus of the world that I come from. I come from, again, user experience, which was putting the customer at the heart of the decision-making process, which is exactly what jobs to be done does. But what I always liked about jobs to be done is it came from a different place. It didn't come from the makers of the world. It came from the business world. It came from Clayton Christensen, Harvard. It came from lots of places that were more traditionally business in their approach. Yeah. And so what attracted me about jobs to be done was not that it's revolutionary, and it's really not, is that it comes with a strong business focus, that it's put together in such a way that business folks can understand it. Yeah. And more than often than not, the Clay Christensen's work, he's the father of jobs to be done, has been wholeheartedly embraced by lots of folks in the C-suite. They've heard of him, they've read the books, The Innovator's Dilemma. They're all familiar with that. So for me, it was a kind of a way of breaking through that product ceiling into the C-suite to speak in a language that they understood, to help them understand customer thinking, product thinking at that level. And jobs to be done was just simply a tool to get there because it had a pedigree and a backing of the Harvard Business Review and Harvard as a whole. So why not use that?
So I feel like that is something that really helps. You can, Christensen by now is a name that's just established. You know him. Everybody talks about disruption, so somehow you have kind of heard of him. But then I think really it's also it's a language that really bridges the gaps. A designer can understand it, a CEO can understand it, a product guy can understand it, somebody from the business can understand it. So I think it gives you a kind of almost like a framework where everybody it belongs to nobody, and everybody can kind of yes, we agree. So if you write the job there, everybody agrees in a certain sense.
And what's great about it is those jobs are almost, as you quite rightly put, they're sort of domain agnostic. So they are great for designers and developers, but they're also great for sales and marketing. If you know what a customer really wants and needs, you can market your product to them in the same language that is backed up by the product that's launched. So at the very least, using jobs to be honest could be a unifying force across the business to help everybody understand what they're trying to do. A shared language of what customer needs are, which again is fantastic if you can get it right. And jobs to be honest is really, really good at that. And it does it in a way without too much of the pretense or the or the drama or the, dare I say it, theatre of some of the other things that we may practice in our product world. There is less in the terms of, and it's easily accessible. There's less acronyms. It's not hidden in a Jira ticket somewhere. There's a lot of accessibility to jobs to be done, which I really, really like.
Yeah, I agree.
I just had a question to connect this back to the previous question on clarity. Are there any situations where, how does jobs to be done mesh with this idea of clarity for you? How does that work?
That's a really good question, actually. So apologies to listeners. My daughter's just come home from school, so she's going to be piling into this room any second. So
that's
a big part of what I do is always including kids in our world. So she's going to pile in. So I do apologize for that. She may not. Anyway, so let me talk about that. Yeah, jobs to be done can give that. It can give a shared understanding of what's going on. It can give you an insight that's easily digestible and easily usable. Can it give you clarity? Not really. It can give you an idea about truly what your customer's job is. So a big thing I talk about with jobs to be done is there's an adage that we've all come across is people don't want a 1/4 inch drill, they want a 1/4 inch hole. Okay, this is a famous Adam, I can't remember the name of the economist who coined this phrase. I call bullshit on that, because nobody wants a hole in their wall. What really people want to do is put that hole in that wall is to put up a picture or to put some shelves up or to do something else. So it's not the end of the journey, it's the hole. And really what jobs to be done is it gets to the root of the problem. So, you asked, the best way to think about it is to ask the question why 5 times, that kind of famous approach that's taken from the Lean Manifesto and other elements is keep asking the customer why until you ultimately get to the job that they're doing, right? So why do you want to buy a drill bit? Well, I want to drill a hole. Why do you want to drill a hole? Well, I want to put a picture up. Why do you want to put a picture up? Well, my daughter's just been born and I'm putting a picture up in her new room. Oh, that's, you can start to unlock really truly what the customer's needs are and unlock markets and products and ideas that can transform the business. And often what that gives you is not necessarily clarity, but a whole new world of possibilities, a new universe you can enter. And so what I love about jobs to be done is how it can shatter the world you're in and make your small universe much bigger by realizing you're not just selling drill bits, you're selling something else. You're selling something more in depth, like, I know, home improvement. There's worlds that you can really open with jobs to be done. That means that the organization can really thrive, which I really love about jobs to be done.
Yeah. I remember this. So I had it was, I think, a couple of months ago where we use this quote all the time. Like, the people don't want to drill, they want the hole in the wall. And I once put that in front of an audience and I said, I used that quote to explain kind of the idea that's the core of jobs to be done and so on. And then somebody in the audience, they said, well, but people don't want a hole. And they said, yes. I said, yes, exactly. So why do you think they want a drill in the first place? Like, so if you already asked the question, why I don't want the hole? If you're already thinking it that way, you got the key element of what jobs to be done is all about. And then now it can work from there. So that's perfect. If
exactly, the true job to be done in that situation is like, I want to remodel my daughter's nursery. That's a different thing from buying a drill bit. And it opens so many more possibilities in terms of the way how you talk about your products, how you build your products, how you design your products. It's really opening the universe to the world of different possibilities. And honestly, that's a big tenet of my coaching work. Is I expand people's universes of expand people's universe of possibilities. Yeah, to really help them realize what's possible. What could this organization do? What could this individual do if they really thought about it?
Yeah. What would you say? Is there a difference in, we talked about UX, we talked about product people or product managers, and then the C level. Is there a different way of how you kind of need to get the idea of jobs to be done across? Are they all getting kind of the same way, or is there a difference there?
It's a different language in different places, and there's seemingly different goals and objectives at each place. But one of the key tenets really of the work that I do as a coach is understanding and sort of being a bit more provocative about the questions that I asked and statements that I give. So one of the big things I talk about, certainly with startup founders and growth founders, is they often measure their business success in terms of ARR, annual recurring revenue, right? Or monthly recurring revenue. It's a big deal in the growth startup world. And the problem with money is money's a lagging indicator. Money's a lagging indicator. Money follows something else. Okay. Approaching the deal of trying to make more money, there's infinite possibilities of doing that. But the reality is money follows success. And so how do you find what success means for your organization? How do you know what success looks like for your organization outside of money? Saying we're going to make $10 million in RRR this year. That becomes really hard when you don't have enough context about how you're going to get there, what the steps are to do that. And so if you start treating money as a lagging indicator of success, you start to define success in terms other than money, you can really start to unlock different ways of solving problems, different ways of growth, all those kinds of things, different routes for product that are very, very different in terms of the way an organization can operate. So a lot of the work that I do at that level is trying to get people beyond money to different measures of success. And across a particular business, those measures of success are everything from, giving customers what they want, to retaining employees, to keeping the board happy, to making sure investors are happy, to all manner of other success criteria that are not just related to money, but money will follow if you get them all right. So it's just about a language change, really, and a perspective change is really what I try to do in the world that I operate in.
I really like that. I mean, money is not the easiest, but it's easy to measure. So probably that's why, of course, we measure it, and in the end, it also, it has its importance. But I like how you say it's a lagging indicator. And for me, I would say earning money is a reward for doing something else. Absolutely, you get rewarded by earning money, but you do something. You can easily push up a balance sheet in tricky ways, or I don't know, you can, but that's not what you want. That's not exact. That if you're honest, that is really not the number that you want to work against in.
Absolutely right. It's particularly Trumpian.
It's very hard to figure out what are other metrics.
Yeah, and you will need to look at what your leading indicators are of success, and you'd be surprised about how many organizations don't know what their leading indicators of success are. And they start to look for things like customer happiness or NPS scores, or all of these sort of really weird esoteric approaches to measure success. But the reality is if you can't define what your leading indicators are in your business, then you're never going to do well. You're never going to be successful. You're never going to transformatively grow. And what's interesting about some of the larger organizations I go to, and like the really big folks who've been doing this a long time, who have kind of got a bit stagnant and a bit flat, is they've fallen into that trap, is they don't know what their leading indicators are. They are just looking at the lagging indicators of money, and employee retention or something like that. They're looking at numbers that are not quite right. And so a big part of that is understanding, well, how do we define success in this organization? And then looking for the leading indicators of that success. And what's interesting is when you start to work with larger organizations as well, is you start to look at things like, well, what do our customers trust us? What's the level of trust our customers have in us? If you're a large enterprise SaaS company, trust is incredibly important. Because again, if your customers trust you, they're going to keep buying your product. They're going to recommend it to their other colleagues. You can see how trust can be a really important one. How do you define trust? What are the leading indicators of trust? And what's interesting as well is you start to see and unlock other elements of corporate success as well, like things like employee happiness. Again, a big part of what I work on with a lot of the leaders I work with is, well, you can't be a successful leader if you're not a successful parent or spouse. If there's something going on in your life somewhere along the line, it's going to bleed through to somewhere else in your life. And so being a successful leader means much more than just being and running a profitable business. It means so much more. If you're happy and content in your world, that will filter down to the rest of the organization, or will equally be as happy and content as you are, because that will come through in terms of nebulous things like culture that are, again, really, really important, because culture drives employees. It drives so many decisions within the business that are unwritten about how they should be made. So there's lots of things you can work on as a leader that can ensure your success that are outside of money.
That's an sorry, do you want to go, Jonathan?
Well, I just wanted to say that was also my experience, that I think as I was at a smaller level, but just with my business, I think a big part of my job I came to realize was to make sure I was in a good state of mind. So it kind of the job went beyond just my day to day to make the business function, but it was also taking care of my mental state. And so I resonate with that quite a lot. And actually, I thought, I don't remember if it's Jeff Bezos who said something to this effect, but I wanted to get your reaction on this. I don't have the exact quote, but it's something like work-life balance is actually is not a good concept, because you could actually, some people might want to be at some stage full time, like they have their whole mind just on their job. At another stage, they might want to focus more on their family or something. And this idea that you need like this pie chart, kind of a pie chart of your activities, and that everything is very well balanced and all this, that they have put this into question. I wondered what your take on that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is one of the tests that I give the folks I work with, one of the questions I ask them is, I'm like, because all of us are working from home in our world, right? And we have done over the last couple of years. CEOs the same way. What is your immediate reaction when you're deep in the middle of a work or something and your child or your spouse comes in and gives you a hug? What's your immediate reaction to that? And there can be two reactions to that. One of which can be, oh, that's really wonderful, that's lovely. Or more often than not, that could be like, oh, stop distracting, I'm just trying to get on with this. Can you let me get on with this, please? And that's really telling about somebody's state of mind. If they can't accept a hug from their spouse or child when they're in the middle of a piece of work, that gets them a bit grumpy. Well, why is that? And we've all experienced it. All of us have. Everybody listening to this podcast has been in both of those situations where they felt both sides of that. And that's a test of balance, really. We all know what we want to do in that situation, is we all want to be that person who sort of turns around and gives the other person a hug. But it's quite hard in that situation to be that person. Yeah. And so that's part of a piece of work that I do with the people I work with, is rebalancing that. And there's many ways that can happen, but that's part of it. And that's an important thing to look at yourself through, really. And we've all been there. I've been, I've been there.
Yeah. I think there is in this work-life balance expression, I think there is somehow there is something wrong, I think, in that expression. I had a professor where I wrote my PhD. She always used to say, well, if you need a work-life balance, then what's the concept of work that you actually have? It sounds like work has something to do with death, not with life. So what the hell? Something is really off in that kind of way of phrase. So I feel like the pandemic, of course, it was, dreadful and still is in some sense, but it started changing the concept of work. I think it started kind of blurring that to a good effect sometimes, not always, but it kind of changed what work actually means. I hope, at least for the better.
Yeah, definitely it has. It's accelerated all of that because, again, the two have merged. And like you say, they're always seen as often competing elements of your life, and they should never be like that. They should be, and balance is maybe a right word, I don't know, but it's they're not competing with each other. They shouldn't have to be like that. Really, they should empower each other and strengthen each other. There's a lot to be said. Doing work, there's nothing wrong with doing work. It's not all of us working to earn our money. There's a lot of satisfaction in our jobs, which is really, really important to all of us. And I think that's the big thing that we need to look at, is where does satisfaction comes from? What does satisfaction mean to you in both your home and work life? And define that a bit more, because again, by getting to the understanding of really what you love about work and what you love about your family and what you don't like about work and what you don't like about, I don't mean this in a bad way, about your family, but about your family situation.
There are sometimes,
is being happy in all elements of your life. It's not if the balance is out or something's wrong, it's not like taking from one and giving to another. It doesn't have to be like that. It's often seen as kind of being, work is at the cost of life and life is at the cost of work. But that's coming from a kind of place of scarcity where we're looking at there's only a finite amount of resources. Again, a big part of what I work on with the people I work with is moving everybody to an abundance mindset where there is enough of everything for everybody. You're not competing against somebody. An abundance mindset. And this is really important in business. It's a huge unlocker of potential in business. So if you look at like a business like Apple, right? Apple have an absolute abundance mindset. Apple don't compete with anybody, really. They don't put competition at the start of what they do. They talk about competition and they do benchmark themselves against competition, but they come at life with an abundance mindset, right? They create new categories like the iPad that didn't exist before. That comes from an abundance mindset. Whereas you look at other organizations who have a scarcity mindset, they're like, oh, we've got to be the leader in the mobile phone market. We've got to be number one. We've got to be number one in the iPad market. They look at being a leader and a competition as winning, that winning means beating the other guy. And the reality is, in an abundance mindset, it's not like that. And true success from a business point of view and a personal point of view comes from that abundance mindset, where you're not competing against somebody else for something else. Is you're creating your own world and selling products and services and businesses within your own world, where you're not competing against somebody else. And it's a big shift and it's a big concept.
Yeah.
But once you get that concept, you can see it across all of your life.
Joe, first, that really resonates with me a lot. So when you're working with a C-level person, or and you can see they've got a big, what you call scarcity mindset, and at least as I'm interpreting it, it's almost an unhealthy obsession with beating the competition, and maybe they're concerned about market share. I mean, like is it 34 or 35, and we got to beat those guys. So that mentality can be one that can be quite ingrained into them. They've taken on this competitive nature, almost this lizard brain. I have to kill the animal. I have to kill my competition. So that seems like a pretty big challenge. So how do you? What are some of your methods to help them to see a different perspective?
I mean, it's a slow journey to get there, really. And you're right. Is you can talk about things. You can have a hunter mindset, or you can have a farmer mindset. Really. It's like there's two ways to think. There's lots of ways you can reframe how you think about things. And the biggest one I notice is, well, what happens when you are number one? What happens when you beat the other guy? How are you going to feel? Right? Yeah. And you might have a party and get drunk, but what's the next day look like? You've done it now. Great. What's next? You won. What do you do next? Once that's happened, and what you notice about folks who are in that mindset of trying to be number one all the time, they never get there. They never do. It's the classic example of like every athlete goes into the Olympic Games wanting to win gold, but not every athlete wins gold. Why? Yeah. Everybody has the same goal, which is I want to win the gold medal, but not every athlete does. And what differentiates the folks that win the gold medal from the ones that don't? And that's the true ability to win success, because everybody has the same goal, is they want to be that successful organization, that successful business, but the reality is you haven't got control over that success. All you've got control over is your actions to get there. Okay. And the best athletes, they eat the best food, they train more often. It's not like they're going around and they're, setting traps for their competition. They're not, it's not quite like that. It's the difference between athletics and boxing. It's a different way of understanding what control you've got, what levers you can pull to get into that position. And once you start looking at that goal in a different way, it can change everything, really. And again, getting gold is a lagging indicator of success. Simple as that.
I couldn't agree more.
And you do the right things to get there. If you train enough, if you eat the right food, we all know that to be true. It's not about beating the other guy. It's about what you can do to get to that position. It's a very different thing.
What occurs to me is you mentioned that it's something common among weightlifters. Is that maybe because in weightlifting there's clear physical differences that you have clear limitations, and so it's like your only competition is yourself yesterday, because there's no pride in being stronger than somebody that's much shorter than you, and there's no shame in not being able to be as strong as somebody with clearly different genetics. And so it's so obvious in weightlifting that your only competition is yourself and who you were yesterday. And that's sort of that's sort of the metaphor that comes to mind.
And it's not like football, either soccer or American football, where there is a winner and a loser. It's a different sort of sport. And business is not like that. Business is more like weightlifting and athletics than it is like any of the others, really. Because again, if you're playing in a league, you reinvent the league, you reinvent the world you're in, and suddenly you haven't got any competition in the same way. You're not fighting somebody else. You're playing a different game to them. And that's the key, is playing a different game to everybody else. That's how you win, is by owning the game, right? I'm 5'6", I'm 160 centimeters. I'm never going to be great at basketball, ever. Really. But guaranteed, there is a sport out there like darts or snooker where I could beat.
Well,
Michael
that's a
Jordan.
very UK thing to say. Like,
I know. I'm trying to think of international sports that are different than that. Kind of get the point. Is there a sport where I could beat somebody who's but I'm never going to beat them at basketball? And that's the key. A lot of this business stuff is you play to the strengths that you've got as a business. You don't try and play somebody else's game. You play your own game. You define your own game, and then you can, in essence, beat everybody because it's your game. You know, the Brits have been very good at that for years. We've invented all the great games like cricket and football, and eventually got beaten at them. But you get the point. You invent the game.
Oh, really? Yeah.
You're going to be number one at it. If you're playing somebody else's game, you are never going to be number one.
Yeah.
And I'm working with it's a startup, very well funded. They're doing incredible things, and their two biggest competitors are going to be, or three biggest competitors are going to be Apple, Google, and Microsoft, right? How, as a startup,
that's a good choice of competition.
How do you beat all those three companies, right? How do you do that? And the answer to that question is you don't play the game. You don't play Microsoft's game. You don't play Apple's game, and you don't play, you don't play Google's game. You play your own game.
Yeah.
And then invite them to play in your playing field afterwards. You change the nature of everything. And it's been eye-opening working for this startup because they're going to do incredible things.
Oh, I want to share two quotes that I really liked. One is from one of your blog posts. So you have some really nice blog posts and a newsletter. I recommend people check it out and subscribe to the newsletter. And I think it's quite a recent post. I don't have the date exactly. It's called Winners versus Losers. And you quote a sentence from Atomic Habits by James Clear. Every Olympian wants to win a gold medal. Every candidate wants to get the job. And if successful and unsuccessful people share the same goals, then the goal cannot be what differentiates the winners from the losers. And I think that is a great quote, and it speaks to what you were saying. And I think is also the essence of James Clear's book, which is the differences in the plan of action that you make and not in the goal. And I also wanted to share a quote that I really like and I think relates a bit to this discussion, which is from Sam Harris, and it's, "You don't have to be the best at any one thing to be uniquely qualified for something." And I really like that quote. So I just wanted to throw it out there.
Love that. Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think that's so important, it's back to what you have control over. We started in this conversation about clarity and control. What you have control over is your own actions and your own actions of your business. You don't have control over the outcome of that. But you can't control who wins. You can control what you do and how you do these things. And it's about understanding that that's where clarity comes from, is understanding what levers you can pull to be successful, not through, like absolutely as James Clear said in his book, everybody shares that same goal. You're never going to share, you're never going to win that. Or you may do, but it's unlikely. You've only got control of the actions and the things that you can do to get you there, nothing else. And Atomic Habits is a great book for that. Really great book for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I feel like, there is some elements probably that we haven't made explicit, but I think here, Jobs to be Done can help a little bit at least. Okay, if we're successful, when I work with people is because that watching the competition is heavily ingrained. I work in Switzerland. There is basically, there's two retailers that, there's other ones. I don't want to kind of name names and shame people, but basically there's two. And all they do is fight about like, okay, we gain 0.5% here. So exactly the same story that Scott mentioned. And if you can just move the goalpost a little bit and say, forget about them, think about what do your customers actually want to achieve, and where are you good at helping them today? Oh,
honestly, it's the danger they're going to face in that world. So this is what I see as well. So I work with a lot of big traditional incumbent businesses, right? So let's take a home improvement store, right? There are two home improvement stores in the world in my country, and they're both competing against each other for the same thing, for like dominance, right? And they're both playing the same game. They both got physical stores. You can go out, you can buy stuff. They compete on things like opening hours, differences by a few cents or pennies or in pricing. The brands are fairly similar. And the reality is that world is ripe for disruption. And it's not going to be either of those two that do it. Somebody will come in and destroy them from a place they're not expecting. Okay. It will be an Amazon of this world that will come in. And the same is true of the grocery chains you're talking about in in Switzerland is that the competition won't come from each other, and they're obsessed with each other. And what happens when you're in that situation? So when I was working with Marriott, I can tell you this story, is Marriott were obsessed with what Hilton were doing all of the time, right? And a colleague of mine was working at Hilton, and Hilton were obsessed with what Marriott was doing at any one time. Two huge, enormous global hotel chains, right? And they were obsessed with each other for such a long time. Look, on that website, they've got this button, and look, they've rebranded their rewards program with this, and look, they get an extra point for their rewards program. They're each playing each other's game, okay? Then a small upstart from the Netherlands came in called Booking.com and kicked them to death in the hotel booking market. Absolutely took them apart. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they came from a completely different place that they weren't expecting. And Booking.com played a different game to Marriott and to Hilton. They weren't competing with Marriott and Hilton. They weren't even that. They were competing with how people booked hotels traditionally, where they went with the brand or they went with something else. And the reality is none of us book hotels based on the brand. We book a hotel based on where it is, its location and its price. At Marriott and Hilton, they were obsessed with the fact,
surprisingly,
people love Hilton. That's why they only shop here, because of the rewards. No, most people don't. Your big customers do, but most people don't. And so Booking.com came in and took 20% of their business almost overnight and they just did not know what to do about it, because competition came from somewhere else, because they didn't fundamentally understand the jobs to be done of that customer. They didn't get it. They thought they did, and they were obsessed with the competition that it come from nowhere. And Absolutely. If you look at all disruption, that's where it comes from. It comes from an unexpected place, seemingly to the big folks. To the rest of us, we can see it coming. And, groceries is a big one for disruption, and it's coming, and it's going to be somebody like Amazon that disrupts it, not an incremental, battle of over time. It's not a Cold War that's going to get them. It's going to be an all-out war with somebody that they're not expecting.
Yeah. I think
groceries somebody's going to transform.
They have to.
Soon.
I mean, we've done it the same way for so long, and it's just, and putting another store in the next small town is not gonna, that's not gonna solve it. Okay. Anyway, I think there is another big message in there that I'd just like to emphasize. I mean, so sometimes in my discussions there is this, and it's kind of hard work to push against this, but there is this idea that there is something like brand loyalty. Now, it may be a little okay. To be fair, maybe there is to a certain degree, but also there is surprisingly little of that. I mean, customers, I'm very sorry to say, but they will switch if something better comes along. They will switch. I mean, why shouldn't they? And I think everybody acts the same way, and businesses also think that way. But there is this idea that because we have been in the business for X, Y, 150 years, and our brand is known, that customers will come to us. And I think that is a very dangerous thought.
Yeah, it's complacency, and that's the big thing you see again with these organizations, is the level of complacency. A good one, recent example is Garmin. They're now a watch manufacturer. So when the new Apple Watch, the new ruggedized Ultra, isn't it? It came out, and the big deal was, it's got 2 days battery life, and Garmin's immediate response that came out saying, we've got 3 weeks battery life. Good luck with that, Apple. And immediately you're thinking, do customers buy a watch based on battery life? If they did, Garmin, you're in a great place. Great, keep doing what you're doing, Garmin.
Yeah,
you've won it. But the reality is, people don't buy watches based on battery life. Apple have already upended that myth, and so that's what's going to be the end of Garmin. Is they won't see it coming in quite that way. They're playing a different game. Apple are playing a different game to them. Very different game to them, and that's where the danger comes from. Is you think you get complacent because you think you have it all. We saw it at Apple, have done it a lot. Did it to Nokia in a quite spectacular way. And there's a great piece called Burning Platform, which was an internal Nokia memo, which I'll put in the notes. And it's a really interesting study on what goes wrong when it comes to corporations and complacency, really, and how you look at that memo and you realize what Nokia. It's not that Nokia didn't see Apple coming, as they kind of did, but they then started playing Apple's game. So as soon as they saw Apple were dominating, and Apple had like a 20% share, and Nokia rate, we'll start playing Apple's game. And that's immediately they lost it then, because they're playing Apple's game, not their own game. And that was the end of Nokia. Was they stopped playing their game and they started playing somebody else's game. And you look at this memo as well, it also talks about Android, the rise of Android. And it's like, okay, so we need to play Apple at their game, we need to play Android at their game. And it's like, okay, so you're now starting a war on two fronts against two separate companies. And you think, you immediately can see the danger there. And I think that's the problem with large incumbents, is it's too late. There's the complacency there. And then when they do start to get nibbled at and bitten at, they start to play the game of that competitor. They start to copy what that competitor does, rather than figuring out, well, what is the real game that we're playing here? Again, you saw it with, there's a great podcast about the rise of Netflix. I now can't remember the name of it, but it goes into real depth about what Blockbuster did. And, we all know the story, Netflix killed Blockbuster, right? That's the story. What's really interesting is actually at one point, Blockbuster had Netflix. They had them in the grasp, and it wasn't about buying them. They had the product that could have killed and destroyed Netflix. And it was they were playing their own game, but they didn't take that product forward. But what's really interesting about that, it's about figuring out what the game is, not about figuring out who the competition are. And Jobs to be Done's great at helping you figure that stuff out. Really great at that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's important that, if you really want to have an incumbent that changes just a little bit, these are tankers. Usually they don't move that quickly. But if it doesn't start at the top, it won't happen anywhere.
No.
So usually it's really, if it's not kind of driven by the C level, it's not going to happen by itself. It's just not.
It never does. No, and again, that's why I want to work that level as well. It's being vigilant about innovation and the future of what you're trying to do. Is if you fundamentally understand the jobs to be done, you should be looking to disrupt your existing business model to something else, because if you don't, somebody else will.
Yeah. And
that's quite a frightening place to be initially, but that can also be quite an exciting place to be. You can see the potential of that when you're there, is to really start thinking about how can we disrupt ourselves, which again is back to Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma. It's that same sorts of thinking. It's that same idea that if you don't disrupt yourself, somebody else is going to, and it already feels quite old-fashioned to say that, but that's the reality. That's the truth of large businesses, and also that's the truth of smaller startups as well. I worked with eBay for a while, and eBay again similarly had it all and lost a lot of that to Amazon. And what was interesting about the time I was at eBay is eBay were extremely strong, and they saw the rise of Amazon, and they started to play Amazon at their own game. And again, it didn't work out very well for them. Really interesting stuff is that it's about innovation should be something you try and do to yourself all of the time. And we all, again, inherently know that to be true, but the C-suite, that's quite a scary place to be.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not there, but that's a different story. So I want to
be there at some point. Now, the thing is with all of us, right? All of us product managers, as we get grayer and older, we're all gonna start to be there. And the point is that we're setting ourselves up with the skills we've got now to do this in the future. Really, if you want to build your career forward, and one of the challenges you have in product is there is a ceiling in terms of a career level in product, and it's like, how do you break through that ceiling if you want to? Where does your career take you in product? And a lot of what we're talking about now are the things that are going to help you break through that ceiling.
Yeah,
one of my crazy ideas that I've said that C-level should do, they should find their super talented product managers and pay them whatever it takes to stay there in perpetuity. Once they're experienced and talented, and they've got all these skills, there's almost nowhere in the company they could be more valuable than right there doing that. And so if the reason, and they usually enjoy it, but it's, so usually but because they're so talented, they're often, let's make him vice president of this or director of that. And then you take this talented person and you sort of put them in a management. It's like, find those product managers and just pay them whatever it takes. Keep them there. Absolutely. Get very innovative. They get a % of profits off their new products. In other words, even give them additional incentives to do what they're already enjoying and good at. It seems like a crazy idea, but because at some level you'd have people below you making more than you. But this is sort of one of my crazy ideas.
No, it's not a crazy idea. If you look, there's a book called The CEO Test, which is a book for CEOs who are starting a new role as a leader. It's a great book. It's a series of interviews with leading CEOs about what's made their success. And one of the things they talk about within it is to identify the key people in your organization who enact, create, define change and success within the business. And everybody assumes that the CEO, that's going to be the folks in the C-suite already, maybe a few couple of distinct VPs. And what it talks about is there's probably in a company of sort of 4,000 or 5,000 people, there's maybe 50 of those folks, right? And you've got to go through and identify them. And you may not be able to find 10 of them, but you need to find the other 40. And Scott, you absolutely could be right. Product managers could be one of those. But it's identifying the key linchpins in your business and empowering them to be great at what they do is what marks out a great CEO is they know that this product manager we have in terms of, in charge of acquisition is pivotal to what we do. Without that person, we are going to be in a mess. But a lot of the time they don't know that. They can't identify these roles. They're too separate and too distant from them. And again, if you read this book, CEO Test, it talks about how you go and find the top 50 people in the organization and empower them to do more stuff, to do more great things. Because again, it's not about trickle down all of the time. It's not always about that.
I feel like that top 50 are probably going to be would almost have a reputation for being troublemakers in their role as they're pushing against.
Absolutely.
Just to follow up with our example, let's say everybody around them is obsessed with their competition and they're resisting that. This is just an example, of course. And they're saying, hey, no, we need to understand what our customers are trying to accomplish. So I feel that's sort of my initial thought is part of those 50. They could sort of be. Yeah. You would agree?
Yeah, you need. I mean, rebels get results. It's it's oft used phrase is that they do. Rebels get results in the world that we're in, and so definitely you need that. You need that kind of that grit in the pearl. You need that element. Not all the time. Not everybody needs to be like that, but you need that in there because again, that's where the ideas come from. And again, the challenge you have in large organizations is often about conformity, and conformity is a big pressure on everybody all of the time. And the reality is as a leader, as a CEO, you can decide what that means. And conformity can be really dangerous for an organization from an innovation point of view, but from so many other sociological and cultural reasons too. From hiring the wrong sort of talent to the strength for diversity, the pushing forward for all of that kind of stuff. Right. So I'm totally with you.
I think this idea is called the Peter principle, right? When you promote people beyond you take good people and promote them to a level where they maybe in an activity or a level that they don't thrive in. Yeah.
I can see that. You're right, because you do, like you say, you end up promoting somebody who's great at a job into management, and management maybe is not their strength anymore. It can be really dangerous and unsatisfying for everybody.
So I think a lot of what we've been speaking about is in a sense has more to do probably with all the psychology and all that aspects than it actually has with business questions, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe how has that helped you, and how does that help you now in your work, this psychology background? I think you always emphasize that of course you're coming from that angle, but it seems to be kind of one of the key things that we should much more be aware of or bring into business as such.
Well, I mean, it depends how you talk about it. So in essence, all business is psychology. So if you look at economics is basically, if you look at behavioral economics, they're effectively saying that economics and psychology are very similar, and the two sides of the same coin, really. And so there is a certain element of that, definitely. If you understand and you design and you build products for humans, you're going to get more results. You're going to get better results. That's a kind of tenet that I've always worked towards. So absolutely, psychology is important at that level, but there's lots of levels of psychology you can talk about as well, from psychology of the customers, but also understanding and appreciating your own psychology, your own background, the world that you work in. So a big part of what I work on with a lot of the leaders I do is a theory within psychology called internal family systems, or IFS. And what IFS talks about is this concept of that we are all made up of a sum of parts, but we have different elements to our personality, right? So again, listeners might know this one of an imposter syndrome. We all probably feel and have a certain level of an imposter syndrome in all of us, right? I've spoken on stage at 2,000 people. My imposter syndrome was right there with me on stage, saying, Joe, you're not good enough to be talking up here. Right through to this podcast, I was really nervous. I'm going to have nothing to say. It's going to be quiet. Nobody's going to want to listen to this. My imposter syndrome was here, right? And we all are made up of these parts. That's one of my parts. And what's interesting about things like that is you attempt to squash that imposter syndrome. Oh, I'm not going to listen to that. You talk about beating your imposter syndrome or squeezing it or defeating it. The reality is my imposter syndrome is part of my success. Is if I didn't have imposter syndrome, I wouldn't put the preparation into what I've talked about today, or I wouldn't put the preparation into my talk. My imposter helps me be better at my job. And I can use that imposter syndrome to steer me in the right direction. I don't want that imposter to stop me doing things. I just want it to help me. And then my last count, I've got about 25 parts that I've identified, like my imposter syndrome, that help me understand at any one point, who's driving the bus of Joe at this point? Is it my imposter syndrome telling me I should say no to this? Or is it my, all of these things that come from the culture that you're in? Like, is it my Britishness of being over polite? I don't want to tell this person what I should tell them. There's all these parts of us that control our behavior, and a certain part might be driving the bus at any one time. And you've got to understand who that part is, and are they worth listening to? What have they got to say? And then ask them to step out of the bus and let somebody else drive if you want. Just being very conscious of the elements in your personality that can help you be great at what you do. And that's a huge part of success that I found, is unlocking those parts of it. And it's something that I use with the leaders that I work with, is helping them identify the parts and the strengths and weaknesses of each of those parts.
Yeah. I like how you take that stance on not being against the imposter syndrome, because I think it's not going to go away. Like, you're never going to, there is a part of you, it's never going to go away, and it even has positive sides. So
exactly.
I really liked it. There is something on your website, I think, which kind of fits here, which I also really like, where you say, I think it's on the where I can, when you can work with you, and then you say, I don't filter by company size, I filter by mindset. And I feel like this is something that really fits here. So can you tell me a little bit, like, well, but you do filter, like, so who should kind of be reaching out to you? How can they do that?
Yeah, so the people, it's an interesting one as I try and think about this. The people I find that I work best with are the folks who are at school, and maybe this is some of us here, who are like, their school report would say things like, super smart, super great at what they do, not living up to their full potential. Something in the system was stopping them from doing it. Like, school sucked, or they weren't successful there, but everybody could identify that potential and see that potential in them. But the traditional realms of school or business hadn't helped them come to success with that. And what's changed now in the world that we all work in as business folks is that we, especially in tech, is we've created a world that suits people like that generation who've come out with those elements of potential, have built businesses around that. And so that's the people I tend to work better with, who've got that potential and know that there's untapped potential there, that they could do more, but don't quite know how to do it. Something's holding them back, something's in the way, that there's unlocked and unmet potential there that they just want to release. That's who I work best with. Yeah.
That very well resonates. Okay, where can they find more about you? So we mentioned your website, so mrjoe.uk. Where are you? How can we reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn's a good place, believe it or not. I do like LinkedIn. I share a lot of this kind of a lot of my experience on LinkedIn. So I share a lot there. So find me, I'm Mr. Joe Leech on LinkedIn. But also on Twitter, I'm Mr. Joe as well. If you want my sort of more unedited view of my life, of me, I'm Mr. Joe on Twitter, MRJOE. I have a newsletter as well where I publish this stuff. So you can get me on my blog, newsletter, LinkedIn, or Twitter, whichever suits you really. I'm in those places.
All right, perfect. So, Joey, thank you very much for doing this and taking the.
No problem. Hey, I've got a bit of an ask of your listeners, if that's all right. If you don't mind me asking.
Of course,
always.
So I would like you folks. Can you share with me, in utter confidence? I want to know. Email me. I'm Joe JOE at mrjoe.uk. I want to know, what are your frustrations with the C-suite folks that you work with? What do you find frustrating about them? Send me an email. And equally, what do you find great about them? Because I am always on this curious world of understanding what great leaders are like and what challenging leaders are like. So just send me your experiences. I'd love to hear from you about what your experiences are with C-suite folks. What frustrates you? What empowers you? What all of those things. But just send me the good and the bad of your C-suite experiences. I would love. Thank you very much.
That's a good one. That's a nice one. Yeah, Jonathan, you.
The email was, can you maybe just
repeat JOE at mrjoe.uk.
That's a very good one. Might I suggest, don't use your company email address to send the email. Maybe it's too telling, but
it's fine. I don't mind.
Of course.
Mr.
Have
Joe's
some,
good
you know,
with it.
I have help with my email. Don't worry, it's not. I'm not in this.
It's-
It's okay. I'll be all right.
Hey, Jan, before you wrap up, I have to ask about on the wall. There's a sign that says "Move slow and mend things." I think I mentioned when we were warming up. I've got the move slow part down. I'm good at moving slow.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about move slow and mend things. What's behind that?
Yeah. So this comes from the kind of famous world of Facebook. In the sort of early on, they were like move fast and break things. So they were like move fast, break things all the time for the goal of growth and success. And we know that with hindsight, that was not it was successful in terms of stock prices and building an enormous company. But in terms of the society and the effects that that's caused have been hugely detrimental. And so moving fast, nothing wrong with moving fast, and breaking things, nothing wrong with breaking things. But again, it's got to come from a considered place. And what I do in my world is I help people do things in a considered way, not in a kind of dangerous way.
Yeah,
That makes sense. So it comes from that reaction.
I really like that. There's since we're kind of in a podcast of quotes, there is a beautiful quote, and I don't exactly have the right quote, but by Chesterton, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, where I think he says, he says, "I never remove a fence if I don't know what it's protecting, what it's keeping inside."
Yeah,
Chesterton's law.
It's okay to remove the fence
Yeah.
when you know what you're doing. So maybe but first figure out what is it exactly that
That's right.
It's such a good approach. That's called Chesterton's law, or there's law of consequences.
All right. Okay. That's even
Is that
yeah.
Really deep stuff there. If you dig into it, it's a big
That's
thing
my
I work
next-
on with a lot of my
my
leaders.
next
Is that
thing.
it's moving. It's a considered movement. No, absolutely. I love that quote. Yeah, really good stuff.
Well, just
Okay. So
one last Chesterton quote I have to throw
Sure.
in. Mr. Joe, this was one of our inspirations as we started the podcast, which is a thing worth doing is worth doing poorly.
Oh, yes.
Which I take to you don't, just because you don't have all the expertise, everything's not in place, whatever, you do it poorly, and then you sort of figure out it as you go along. That was how I rationalize us getting started on our little podcast journey.
yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I really like. Yeah, it makes so much sense. Really. Yeah, love it.
All right. So that concludes today's Product Quest podcast with Joy Leech. Please send any comments or ideas to productquestpodcast@gmail.com, and see you next time. Very nice.
I enjoyed that. Thank you so much. What a great conversation. Just brilliant.